Your TT or triathlon bike should be a perfect balance of aerodynamic and comfortable.
Feel like you're being forced into an unnatural position and it hurts in all the wrong places?
Well, keep watching as I discuss how to dial in your bike to make sure it's as fast as possible and comfortable.
Well, you touch your bike or your bike touches you in 5 different places. Your feet on the pedals, your hands on the handlebars, and of course, your butt on the saddle. And if you're riding a TT or triathlon bike like I am, well, I guess it's 6 or 7 because you've got the aerobars, of course. Now, just having one of those contact points set up incorrectly can actually affect all of the others. They all need to work together for that optimal bike setup. So today, I'm going to run through each of the contact points and you'll quickly learn just how interrelated and connected they all are, starting with the pedals.
Well, these are at one end of the lever that transfers all those massive watts that your legs are producing into the bike. Yeah, I know. Now, these are often overlooked because, well, the pedals are fixed in their position, and once we've installed our cleats, which fix into or onto those pedals, we rarely move them. But actually, we should start here because just even small changes to the position of the cleats, our shoe setup, and even the pedals can make huge differences and changes to our comfort. For example, shifting your cleats further back on the sole of the shoe shortens the lever of your foot, taking large amounts of strain off your calf. But this also shortens the entire leg length, meaning your saddle actually needs to be lower. This in turn means your crank length is longer relative to your leg length, and so it could lead to a more closed hip angle at the top of the stroke. Whereas shortening the crank length will actually allow you to get your torso lower without the knee coming up quite as high at the top of the pedal stroke, and therefore decreasing and reducing the hip angle, which will obviously make things uncomfortable. However, this will decrease the leverage you have at the crank, which is especially noticeable when you're perhaps going up a big climb at a low cadence up out the saddle. You'll really sort of feel it then. Now, when it comes to your setup and shoe choice and things like that, it's best to actually start by making sure that the pedal axle is just below the ball of your foot and nicely in line with that. And then start with a nice natural foot position. So rather than having your toe in or heel in or out, just have a nice natural position and then you can tweak from that point. And the next contact point, and probably the one that most people commonly talk about, the saddle. Now, I know people will go through countless different saddles trying to find the one that works for them. I've even known pros on rides, I've seen them, I've witnessed them, jumping off their bikes mid-ride and throwing their bikes in ditches out of frustration and discomfort with their saddle. Maybe don't do that. But saddle discomfort can mean a variety of things. I mean, if you're experiencing pain or even bruising, it could actually be down to the position of your saddle. Maybe it's too high or too low, or it could be the saddle itself. It may be not suiting your anatomy or your sit position on that saddle. If you're experiencing rubbing or even chafing, well, this is actually rarely a result of the saddle. It could be, of course, but most often it's actually down to the clothing choice that may be causing that. And if you're experiencing numbness or loss of function, this is almost certainly down to the saddle choice or a very incorrect position setup. A saddle too high will fairly obviously increase pressure on your seat. But actually, this isn't the biggest issue with a high saddle because most of the time, throughout the majority of the pedal stroke, one or the other leg is supporting some of your weight. Only at the very bottom of the stroke do you feel the pressure. The biggest issue with a high saddle is either compensation, such as pointing your toes downwards to ease that pressure, or rocking. Now, rocking is where, with every pedal stroke, your hip rocks left and right, and this causes significant chafing, pressure, and discomfort.
Now, surprisingly perhaps, a saddle that's too low will actually cause more issues with saddle pressure than a saddle that's too high. And this is because with the leg being more bent, it's less able to support our body weight and take that weight off. So we feel that weight more through our butt, through the saddle. Now, because of this, it's really important we get our saddle height right, but this can be a bit of an art. For pros, we call this a bit of a Goldilocks zone actually, because it can be as little as a 1 mil tolerance, and for your average triathlete, it's actually as little as around 3 to 4 mil. So you really want to make sure that you get that right. And you may also want to look at your fore-aft position of the saddle, basically how far forwards or how far back that saddle is. We'll actually get onto that in a little bit more detail in a second when we're talking about the bars and the aero bars. But if you've made sure all of this is correct, your saddle's at the right height, well, it actually might be down to the saddle itself, and you might need to start having a look at different options. Now, word of warning here, just going for more cushioning isn't always the answer. In fact, actually, in some cases, less cushioning will actually decrease that feeling of pressure. And also, you want to take a look at the different types and saddles on option to suit your anatomy. For example, Ergon actually have 2 offerings for both men and women. They got a mid saddle and a front saddle. And James, for example, is on the mid saddle, I'm on the front saddle, simply down to our different sit positions when we're in the aerobars.
Now, many triathletes pay close attention to their aerobar setup, their aero position, and understandably so, because it is the fastest position. And we'll get on to that very shortly, but it's worth noting that you're probably going to spend a considerable amount of time not in your aero bars, probably sat up in the base bar. And that also needs close attention, particularly so with the contact point material, the width, the height, and also the fore-aft position of the base bar. Now, the material used on a lot of these base bars on the grip area is often just your standard handlebar tape, and it's worth actually potentially upgrading that bar tape to something maybe a little bit more plush and more comfortable, because you're actually going to have a little bit more weight down on the base bar onto a smaller area than you would on a typical just road bike setup. But if, like me, you've got an integrated grip, we've got these really nice Ergon ones on the Canyons, which are actually ergonomically designed to just be a little bit more comfortable. They're going to just feel a little bit more safe and prevent any slippage when you're in the base bars, particularly with sweaty hands. Now, base bar height is typically quite hard to adjust on triathlon TT bikes, or at least a lot of bikes. If you've got it too low, you may feel like you've got a lot of weight going down through your arms. You may feel like you're quite far over the front wheel, and it may actually affect your handling of the bike. But equally, if you have it too high, you may feel like you're really hunched up, particularly so when you start getting up out of the saddle going uphill. As I say, can often be difficult to adjust, but worth considering, particularly if you are looking to upgrade any parts on the bike or the bike itself. Another thing you can adjust on some TT bikes is the width of the handlebars. Now, if you are lacking confidence on a triathlon bike or just the technical skills sort of going downhill and things, then actually going for a slightly wider base bar can help with that. Now, failing all of that and you're still just not feeling great, maybe you feel like you've got a lot of weight over the front of the base bar or over that front wheel, you can actually also start looking at the saddle position, the fore-aft position. So if you do feel like there's a lot of weight over the front and a lot of weight going down through your arms, you can actually push the saddle back a little bit, and that's just going to distribute the weight a little bit better between your arms and the saddle. Failing all of that, if you still can't fix it, then it might be that you need a new bike, slightly bigger size. Sorry.
And finally, the one that gets most of the setup attention, the aerobars. There are so many options out there and available that, well, everyone can find one that's right for them. But with that, it means it's a bit of a minefield. And, well, where do you start? Well, I'm going to run through those different options, the different positions, so you're better informed, but also so you know which ones to avoid.
So we've got the forearm tilt. So flat forearms versus tilted up forearms isn't really about the arms facing the wind. It's about how high or low you can have your elbows. Without shoulder strain, higher hands, lower elbows can be a better and more comfortable position. But with this, you generally need more support for the forearm and elbow, as small pads will have too much pressure going through them. Also, hand position, tilting your hands up or down can help to relax your forearms. But obviously everyone has different flexibility, different or preferred hand positions, so find what's right for you to make that work. And then there's elbow support. As we've said, the right amount of elbow/forearm support is important. These days, more and more bars are spreading the weight over a larger contact area with the forearm. And elbow width. Now, obviously having narrower and tighter elbows is more aero, but if you're a relative newcomer to the sport, don't emulate the pros, because as you go narrower, there is a slight loss of control or sense of loss of control and handling with the bike. So start a little bit wider, and then if you like, with time, you can start to go a little bit narrower. And finally, height. Of course, aerobar height is a primary consideration in your aerobar setup, but lower is not always better. Firstly, if you can't stay there, it's pointless. Secondly, going too low closes your hip angle, decreasing the amount of power that you're potentially able to put out. And again, lower in the front shifts more body weight forward, affecting the weight on your arms and thus your comfort and also your bike handling. Well, as you can see, all the contact points need to be considered, and if you change one of those contact points, you then need to look at all the others, and then you change another, and then all the others again. You kind of keep going round and round, and it's a bit of a game of chasing a tailwheel bike setup. And then on top of that, you've got an adaptation phase. So is it that you're uncomfortable because you just need time to get used to it, or is it because you need to change something else? The truth is you can gain huge watt savings through a better position, but also on the flip side of that, you can throw away very valuable watts that you've trained very hard for in a trained position. So should you go for a big and drastic change to your position in hope that you improve it and gain some valuable watts from it, or do you make small incremental changes throughout an entire season until you get that perfect fit? Well, that is entirely up to you. But what I will say is you will always be striving for a better position. In my opinion, I've tried to find something that is fairly optimal and works for me, and I've stuck to it and I've trained in it and got myself really used to it, rather than just always striving for a better position, because otherwise, if I'm honest, I'd probably be jumping off a bike every 5 minutes with an Allen key in my hand trying to adjust a millimetre here or there. But you do with all this information as you will, and I hope it has helped you today. If so, please do give it a thumbs up, give it a like, and we'll see you next time, and don't forget to subscribe.